The horse stumbled beneath her, and Sarah Brennan knew with a sinking certainty that they would both die under this merciless Arizona sun if something did not change within the next few hours. The mare's breathing had become labored and shallow, each step more uncertain than the last as they trudged across the endless expanse of sand and rock. Sarah's lips were cracked and bleeding, her tongue swollen in her mouth, and the empty canteen at her hip mocked her with its lightness. She had rationed the water carefully, sharing what little she had with the horse, but the desert had proven far more vast and unforgiving than the man in Tucson had promised when he sold her the supposedly accurate map to her uncle's ranch in New Mexico. That map, she now realized, was either deliberately falsified or drawn by someone who had never actually made the journey. She should have arrived at the relay station 2 days ago. Instead, she found herself surrounded by nothing but heat-shimmered horizons and the occasional skeletal remains of less fortunate travelers. The mare stumbled again, nearly going down to her knees, and Sarah dismounted quickly to spare the animal her weight. Her legs trembled as they took her full burden, weak from dehydration and the relentless sun that had beaten down on them for 3 days straight. She stroked the horse's sweat-dampened neck, feeling the rapid, irregular heartbeat beneath the skin. "I am so sorry, girl," she whispered, her voice barely more than a rasp. "I should have known better. I should have listened when they said a woman could not make this journey alone, but she'd had no choice. Her father had died 6 months ago, leaving nothing but debts. Her mother had passed when Sarah was 12. The only family she had left was Uncle Thomas, who had written 2 years ago from his ranch near Santa Fe, promising her a home if she ever needed one. When the creditors came to seize their Boston townhouse, that letter had been her only hope. She had sold everything she could not carry, bought passage on a train west, and then made the fatal mistake of trusting the wrong people in Tucson. They had taken most of her remaining money for the horse, saddle, supplies, and map. By the time she realized the deception, she was already a day into the desert with no way back. Now she was going to die for her foolishness, and this poor innocent animal would die with her. Sarah forced herself to keep walking, leading the horse rather than riding. The sun was beginning its descent toward the western horizon, which meant the terrible heat would soon give way to the brutal cold of a desert night. She had one thin blanket, no water, no food left since yesterday, no shelter in sight. She thought of her father, of his kind eyes and gentle hands as he treated patients in their Boston neighborhood. He had been a doctor, dedicated to helping the poor who could not afford fancy physicians. That dedication had kept them perpetually on the edge of poverty, but Sarah had never minded. She had been proud of him, proud of the lives he saved and the suffering he eased. If only she had inherited his medical knowledge instead of just his impractical idealism. Perhaps then she would have had the sense to plan this journey better. The horse stopped walking. Sarah tugged gently on the reins, but the mare simply stood, head hanging low, sides heaving. When Sarah walked around to look into the animal's eyes, she saw the resignation there, the exhaustion that went bone deep. "Please," Sarah whispered, tears cutting tracks through the dust on her face. "Please, just a little farther. Maybe there is water over the next rise. Maybe someone will find us." But even as she spoke, she knew the words for the desperate lies they were. There had been nothing but sand and rock and scrub brush for 2 days. No rider, no wagon, no sign of human habitation. The desert stretched endlessly in all directions, indifferent to her suffering. She sank down beside the horse, her back against the animal's trembling legs, and closed her eyes against the glare. Perhaps it would be better to simply wait here, to let the sun and the thirst take them both. Fighting seemed so pointless now, so terribly exhausting, but then she heard it. Faint at first, so faint she thought it might be a delusion born of desperation. The sound of hoofbeats. Sarah's eyes snapped open. She struggled to her feet, scanning the horizon with a hand shading her eyes. There to the north, a dark speck that grew larger with each passing moment. A rider, Moving at a steady lope across the desert floor, she tried to call out, but her ruined throat produced only a croak. She waved her arms instead, using the last of her strength to make herself visible. The rider seemed to shift direction slightly, angling toward her, and hope flared in her chest like a struck match. As the figure drew closer, Sarah could make out more details. A tall man on a buckskin horse, wearing a wide-brimmed hat pulled low against the sun. He sat his saddle with the easy confidence of someone who had spent his entire life on horseback. Even from a distance, she could see the way he moved with the horse, the two of them functioning as a single unit. He reached her within minutes, pulling his horse to a stop a few feet away. Dust billowed around them as he dismounted in one fluid motion, and Sarah found herself looking up at a man who could not have been more than 28 or 30 years old. His face was deeply tanned and weathered by sun and wind, with strong features that might have been handsome if not set in such stern lines. Dark eyes assessed her and her horse with a quick, measuring glance that missed nothing. "You look about half dead," he said, and his voice was a deep rumble, rough around the edges but not unkind. There was a slight drawl to his words, marking him as someone who had grown up in the southern territories. "My horse," Sarah managed to croak. "Please, she needs water." Something flickered in those dark eyes, surprise perhaps, that her first concern was for the animal rather than herself. He moved to his own horse and unhooked a canteen from his saddle, then approached the dying mare. The horse's ears swiveled toward him, but she did not lift her head. "Easy now," the cowboy murmured, his voice dropping to a soothing tone. He poured water into his cupped palm and held it to the mare's muzzle. The horse snuffled weakly at the moisture, then began to lap at it with desperate gratitude. He repeated the process several times, patient and methodical, giving the animal small amounts so she would not founder. Only when the mare's breathing had eased somewhat did he turn his attention to Sarah. "Your turn," he said, holding the canteen out to her. Sarah's hands shook as she reached for it. The moment the first drops touched her lips, she wanted to gulp it down to drain the entire container in one long swallow. But the cowboy kept his hand on the canteen, controlling the flow. "Slow," he instructed. "Small sips or you will be sick." She forced herself to obey, taking tiny mouthfuls and letting them trickle down her throat. The water was warm and tasted faintly of metal and leather, and it was the most wonderful thing she had ever experienced. After several sips, he pulled the canteen away despite her sound of protest. "More in a minute," he said firmly. "Let that settle first." He walked around her horse again, running his hands over the animal's legs and body with the practiced touch of someone who knew horses intimately. His face remained impassive, but Sarah saw the tightness around his mouth, the way his jaw clenched. "She is in bad shape," he said finally. "Dehydrated, exhausted, probably got heat stress. How long you been out here without water?" "Since yesterday morning," Sarah admitted, her voice slightly stronger now. "We ran out yesterday morning." "Yesterday morning," he repeated, and she heard the disbelief beneath the flat tone. "Lady, it is over 90 degrees out here. You should be dead." "I know," she whispered. He studied her for a long moment, and Sarah became acutely aware of how she must look. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and hung in a tangled mess around her face. Her traveling dress, once a respectable gray wool, was filthy and torn. Dust and sweat caked every inch of exposed skin. She probably looked like something that had crawled out of a grave. "Where are you headed?" he asked. "Santa Fe. My uncle has a ranch near there. I was told this was the most direct route from Tucson." "Told by who?" When she did not answer immediately, he shook his head. "You got swindled. Tucson to Santa Fe does not go through this part of the desert unless you are trying to avoid the law or you are too ignorant to know better. The proper route follows the old trail north, with stations every 30 miles. You are about 50 miles south of where you should be. 50 miles. The number hit Sarah like a physical blow. 50 miles in the wrong direction, into some of the most inhospitable terrain in the Arizona territory. She had been so profoundly lost that even if she had somehow survived, she would never have reached her destination. "I see," she said quietly, fighting back tears. She would not cry. She had already displayed enough weakness in front of this stranger. The cowboy seemed to sense her distress because his expression softened slightly. "What is your name?" "Sarah Brennan." "I am Caleb Hayes. My family has a ranch about 15 miles northeast of here. We should head there before dark. Can you ride?" "Yes, but my horse cannot carry me. She can barely carry herself." Caleb frowned, looking between Sarah and the two horses. "My buckskin can take us both if we go slow." "Your mare can follow on a lead rope as long as we do not push her. It will take longer, but we should make it before full dark if we leave now." The practicality of his solution, delivered in that matter-of-fact tone, made Sarah want to weep with relief. She had been so certain she would die out here, and now this stranger was calmly planning their route to safety as if rescuing foolish women from the desert was something he did every day. "Thank you," she said, and meant it with every fiber of her being. "Thank you so much, Mr. Hayes." "Save your thanks until we get to the ranch," he replied, but there was the faintest hint of warmth in his voice now. "Can you mount up on your own, or do you need help?" Pride made her want to say she could manage, but honesty won out. "I may need help. My legs are not very steady." He nodded and moved to his buckskin, which stood calmly through the preparations. The horse was a fine animal, well-muscled and clearly well cared for, with intelligent eyes that watched Sarah without fear or aggression. Caleb mounted first, then held down his hand to her. Sarah grasped his hand and was startled by the strength in it, the calluses that spoke of years of hard work. He pulled her up behind him with seemingly effortless ease, and she found herself seated on the horse's rump, her arms instinctively wrapping around Caleb's waist to maintain her balance. She tried not to notice the solid warmth of him, the way his muscles moved beneath his worn cotton shirt. It seemed inappropriate to be so aware of a man she had just met, especially given that he was literally saving her life. But she could not help it. After 3 days of solitude and terror, the simple human contact was almost overwhelming. Caleb secured her mare's reins to his saddle horn, creating a lead rope, then clicked his tongue to set the buckskin walking. The horse moved out smoothly, setting an easy pace that the exhausted mare could match. Sarah's horse followed with her head still hanging low, but she was moving, and that was what mattered. They rode in silence for a while, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and the jingle of tack. The sun continued its descent, painting the desert in shades of gold and orange and deep red. Under other circumstances, Sarah might have found it beautiful. Now she simply felt grateful that the terrible heat was beginning to ease. "Where are you from originally?" Caleb asked, startling her from her thoughts. "Your accent is Eastern, Boston," Sarah replied. "I came west after my father died. There was nothing left for me there." "Boston is a long way from Santa Fe. Yes, it has been quite a journey." She paused, then added, "I did not intend to be so foolish. In Tucson, a man told me he could sell me everything I needed for the trip. He seemed so knowledgeable, so trustworthy. I realize now how naive I was." "Tucson is full of men who make their living off naive travelers," Caleb said, and there was an edge of anger in his voice now. "They see someone like you, alone and inexperienced, and they figure you for easy money. Probably sold you this horse for 3 times what she is worth and gave you a map that leads nowhere." "That is exactly what happened," Sarah admitted. "By the time I realized my mistake, I had already spent a day riding in the wrong direction. I thought about trying to go back, but I was not sure I could find Tucson again, and I was afraid of running into the men who swindled me." Caleb grunted, which Sarah took as agreement with her reasoning. They lapsed into silence again, and she found herself becoming drowsy despite everything. The gentle rocking motion of the horse, the warmth of the setting sun, and the relief of being rescued all combined to make her eyelids heavy. She must have dozed off because the next thing she knew, Caleb was speaking to her, his voice low and close. "Miss Brennan, Sarah, we are here." Sarah blinked her eyes open and looked around. The sun had set while she slept, leaving the sky a deep purple streaked with the last traces of orange. Ahead of them, she could see lights glowing warm and welcoming in the windows of a low, adobe structure. Other buildings clustered nearby, darker shapes in the gathering dusk. As they approached, a door opened and a figure emerged backlit by the interior light. "Caleb, that you?" a man's voice called. "It is me, Pa," Caleb called back. "Got someone with me who needs help." The figure moved closer, resolving into a man in his 50s with graying hair and a build similar to Caleb's, though shorter and stockier. His weathered face creased with concern as he took in the sight of Sarah clinging to his son's back. "Good Lord, what happened?" "Found her about 15 miles south, her and her horse both about dead from thirst," Caleb explained as he brought the buckskin to a halt. "She got swindled in Tucson, sold a false map, and pointed into the deep desert. Those damned vultures," the older man muttered. He reached up to help Sarah down, his hands gentle despite their strength. Her legs buckled the moment her feet touched the ground, and he caught her easily. "Easy there, miss, I have got you. Caleb, go fetch your mother." "Already on it," Caleb said, dismounting quickly and striding toward the house. The older man helped Sarah toward the building, supporting most of her weight. "I am John Hayes, Caleb's father. You are safe now. We will get you fixed up." Before Sarah could respond, a woman appeared in the doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. She was perhaps in her late 40s, with dark hair shot through with silver and kind eyes that immediately assessed the situation. "Bring her inside, John," she said briskly. "Caleb, see to the horses." Poor thing looks half-starved as well as dried out. The next hour passed in a blur of gentle efficiency. Caleb's mother, whose name was Martha, helped Sarah out of her filthy dress and into a clean cotton nightgown that must have belonged to someone in the family. She brought a basin of water and cloths and helped Sarah wash away 3 days' worth of grime. All the while, she kept up a steady stream of conversation, asking gentle questions about Sarah's journey and making sympathetic noises at the answers. John brought in a tray with simple food, bread, butter, cold chicken, and more water. Martha made Sarah eat slowly, just as Caleb had made her drink slowly, explaining that her stomach needed to adjust gradually. "We had a ranch hand once who got lost in the desert for 2 days, Martha said as she brushed the tangles from Sarah's hair. "When we found him, he drank so much water so fast that he was sick for hours. You need to take it easy, let your body recover proper-like." "I cannot thank you enough," Sarah said for what felt like the 100th time. "All of you, I would have died out there if Caleb had not found me." "Well, thank the Lord he did," Martha replied warmly. "Now, are you feeling well enough to come sit with the family for a bit, or would you rather rest?" Sarah's first instinct was to retreat to wherever they planned to let her sleep, to hide away and process everything that had happened. But something made her say, "I would like to sit with you if that is all right. I have been alone for so many days." Martha's face softened with understanding. "Of course, dear. Come on then." She led Sarah into what was clearly the main living area of the house. It was a large room with thick adobe walls and exposed wooden beams across the ceiling. A fireplace dominated one wall, unlit in the summer heat. Comfortable, well-worn furniture arranged around a large table suggested this was where the family spent most of their time. John Hayes sat in a chair near the window, smoking a pipe and reading a newspaper by lamplight. He looked up when they entered and smiled. "Feeling better, miss?" "Much better, thank you," Sarah replied. Martha guided her to a cushioned chair, and Sarah sank into it gratefully. The door opened and Caleb entered, having clearly washed up himself. His dark hair was still damp and slicked back from his face, and he had changed into a clean shirt. Without the layer of trail dust, Sarah could see him more clearly, and she realized her initial impression had been wrong. He was handsome, very much so, with strong features and those deep brown eyes that seemed to see everything. He caught her looking, and Sarah quickly glanced away, feeling her cheeks heat with embarrassment. "How is my horse?" she asked, needing to fill the sudden awkward silence. "She will live," Caleb said, settling into a chair across from her. I gave her water and a small amount of grain, rubbed her down. She is resting in the stable now. She was in bad shape, but horses are tougher than they look sometimes. Few days of rest and proper care, she should recover. Relief flooded through Sarah. Thank you. I was so worried about her. It was not her fault I led us into danger. No, it was the fault of the men who cheated you, Caleb said, and there was that edge of anger again. A woman traveling alone should be able to trust the people she does business with, but there are too many who see that as an opportunity to take advantage. Now, Caleb, do not go getting yourself worked up, Martha said, though her tone suggested she agreed with the sentiment. The important thing is Miss Brennan is safe now. It is Sarah, please, Sarah interjected. After everything you have done for me, I think we are beyond formalities. Sarah it is, Martha agreed with a warm smile, and you must call us by our given names as well. Now tell us about your uncle in Santa Fe. Does he know you are coming? Sarah shook her head. I wrote to him before I left Boston, but I do not know if the letter arrived. Mail service can be uncertain over such distances. His last letter to me was over a year ago. He may not even be at the same ranch anymore. She saw the three family members exchange glances and felt her stomach sink. What? She asked. What is wrong? Nothing is wrong necessarily, John said carefully. But Santa Fe is still a good 2 weeks' travel from here, maybe more depending on conditions. And if your uncle is not there when you arrive, or if something has happened to him, you would be in a difficult situation. I know, Sarah said quietly, but I have nowhere else to go. My father's debts consumed everything we had. I have no other family, no friends who could take me in. My uncle is my only hope. The room fell silent except for the ticking of a clock somewhere and the soft sounds of the desert night drifting through the open windows. Sarah felt the weight of her precarious situation settle over her like a blanket. These kind people had saved her life, but she could not impose on them indefinitely. She would need to continue her journey to find her uncle or figure out some other solution. But the thought of going back out into that desert, of facing more endless days of heat and thirst and uncertainty, made her want to curl up and never move again. You are welcome to stay here as long as you need, Martha said firmly, breaking the silence. At least until you are fully recovered. That should take a few days at minimum. Then we can help you plan a proper route to Santa Fe, make sure you have adequate supplies. I cannot pay you, Sarah admitted, hating how helpless she sounded. The men in Tucson took nearly everything I had. I have maybe $5 left. We are not asking for payment, John said gruffly. What kind of people would we be if we charged someone for basic human decency? You could help around the house, Martha suggested. I could use an extra pair of hands with cooking and such. We have ranch hands who need feeding 3 times a day, and it is a lot of work. If you stayed a week or two and helped with that, we would call it more than even. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes at the kindness. I would be happy to help. I am a decent cook. My father and I managed on our own for years after my mother passed. Then it is settled, Martha said with satisfaction. You will stay with us for a bit, regain your strength, help around the house, and then we will see about getting you to Santa Fe properly. We could put together a proper outfit for her, Caleb said, speaking up for the first time in several minutes. Horse supplies, maybe even find someone heading that direction who could travel with her. Ben Morrison was talking about driving some cattle up north next month. His route might take him close to Santa Fe. That is a good thought, John agreed. In the meantime, Sarah can settle in here and we can all get to know each other. The conversation drifted to other topics after that, the ranch's operations, the summer weather, some trouble they had been having with a mountain lion taking calves. Sarah listened, letting the flow of normal family interaction wash over her. After so many days of solitude and fear, being surrounded by people again felt almost surreal. She found her gaze drifting to Caleb repeatedly throughout the evening. He did not speak much, letting his parents carry most of the conversation, but when he did contribute, his words were thoughtful and measured. There was a quiet competence about him, a sense that he was someone who knew exactly who he was and what he was capable of. She kept thinking about the moment when he had first arrived, how his first instinct had been to care for her dying horse before seeing to his own needs. That simple act of compassion had told her more about his character than 1,000 words could have. Eventually, Martha noticed Sarah trying to suppress a yawn and immediately insisted she needed rest. She led Sarah to a small room off the main living area, explaining that it had belonged to Caleb's sister before she married and moved to her husband's ranch near Albuquerque. "We keep it ready for when she visits," Martha explained, lighting a lamp on the bedside table. "The bed is comfortable and you should sleep well. If you need anything in the night, our room is just across the hall. Do not hesitate to call out." "Thank you," Sarah said, meaning it with all her heart. "For everything," Martha patted her hand. "Get some rest, dear. Things will look better in the morning. They always do." After Martha left, Sarah climbed into the bed and blew out the lamp. The mattress was soft, the sheets clean and smelling faintly of lavender. Through the open window, she could hear the distant sounds of horses in the corral and the chirping of crickets. She had survived. Against all odds, she had survived. And now she was safe, at least for the moment, in the care of people who had shown her nothing but kindness. Sarah closed her eyes and let exhaustion pull her down into deep, dreamless sleep. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee and bacon drifting through the house. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then memory returned in a rush. The desert, the dying horse, Caleb's arrival like an answer to a prayer she had not even known she was praying. Someone had left fresh clothes folded on the chair near the bed. Sarah rose and dressed, finding that the simple cotton dress fit reasonably well, though it was a bit loose in places. It must have belonged to Caleb's sister. She made her way to the main room and found Martha already hard at work at the stove. The older woman turned and smiled when Sarah entered. "Good morning. I was just about to check on you. How are you feeling?" "Stiff and sore, but much better," Sarah replied honestly. "What can I do to help?" "Oh, you do not need to start working right away," Martha protested. "You should rest another day at least, please," Sarah said. "I want to help. I need to feel useful after everything you have done for me." Martha studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, then. You can start by setting out plates for breakfast. We will be feeding 6 today, you, me, John, Caleb, and 2 of our ranch hands, Miguel and Tom." Sarah set to work, grateful to have something to do with her hands. Martha pointed her to where everything was kept, and soon Sarah had the large table set with plates, utensils, and cups. Martha brought over a large pot of coffee and a platter piled high with bacon, eggs, and fried potatoes. The men began filing in shortly after, bringing with them the smell of horses and leather and honest work. Miguel was a stocky man in his 40s with a ready smile and a thick Mexican accent. Tom was younger, perhaps Caleb's age, with sandy hair and an easy manner. Both men treated Sarah with polite courtesy but obvious curiosity. It was clear that Caleb had told them the basics of her story, because neither seemed surprised by her presence. Caleb was the last to arrive, and Sarah noticed the way his gaze found her immediately, checking to see how she looked this morning. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod that might have been approval or simply acknowledgement. Breakfast was a lively affair, with the men discussing the day's work between bites of food. There was a fence that needed mending on the south pasture, several horses that needed shoeing, and ongoing training of some young colts John planned to sell in the fall. "Caleb, why do not you take Sarah around the ranch today?" Martha suggested. "Show her where everything is, let her get her bearings. It will be easier for her to settle in if she knows her way around." "I have got work to do, Ma," Caleb protested. "The fence can wait a few hours," John said, and there was something in his tone that suggested this was not entirely about helping Sarah orient herself. "Take the morning. Miguel and Tom can handle the colts." Caleb looked like he wanted to argue further but subsided with a nod. "All right. Sarah, if you want to see the place, I can show you around after breakfast." I would like that, Sarah said, though she felt suddenly nervous. The thought of spending time alone with Caleb made her oddly self-conscious in a way that had nothing to do with gratitude or obligation. After the meal, while Martha shooed Sarah away from helping with dishes, Caleb led her outside into the bright morning sun. Sarah had to pause for a moment, letting her eyes adjust to the brilliant light. The ranch looked very different in daylight than it had in last night's dusk. The main house was built of adobe, long and low with a covered porch running along the front. Several other structures surrounded it: a large barn, a stable, a bunkhouse, and what looked like a storage shed. Beyond that, corrals and pastures stretched out, with mountains visible as purple smudges in the far distance. We have about 1,500 acres, Caleb explained as they walked. Most of it is grazing land for cattle, but we also raise horses. Pa started with cattle 20 years ago when he first claimed this land. Added horses about 10 years back when he realized the army fort up north was always looking to buy good mounts. It is a beautiful place, Sarah said, and meant it. There was something stark and honest about the landscape, the way everything seemed stripped down to essentials under that vast blue sky. It is home, Caleb said simply. Only place I have ever known. I was born in that house, grew up working this land, figure I will die here eventually. There was no sadness in the statement, just acceptance. Sarah envied that certainty, that deep knowledge of where you belonged in the world. She had never felt that way, not even in Boston. The city had always seemed temporary somehow, as if she was just passing through on her way to somewhere else. Caleb showed her the stable where her mare was housed, and Sarah was relieved to see the animal looking much better. The horse's eyes were clearer, and she came to the stall door to nuzzle Sarah's hand when she approached. "See. I told you she would be all right," Caleb said, and Sarah heard something that might have been satisfaction in his voice. "She is a decent mare, actually, good lines. Whoever bred her knew what they were doing. She just got put in a bad situation." "Like me," Sarah murmured. "Like you," Caleb agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then added, "Takes a lot of courage to come all this way alone. Most women would not even try." "I did not have much choice. It was come west or end up in a workhouse or worse." "Still took courage," Caleb insisted. "And you kept going even when things went wrong. That counts for something." Sarah felt warmth spread through her chest at his words. Coming from this competent, self-assured man, the praise meant more than it probably should have. They continued the tour, with Caleb pointing out various features of the ranch and explaining how things worked. He had a way of talking about the land and the animals that showed deep affection without becoming sentimental. This was his life, the work that gave him purpose, and Sarah found herself fascinated by the glimpse into a world so different from her own upbringing. "What did your father do in Boston?" Caleb asked as they paused near a corral where several horses grazed. "He was a doctor." "Not the fancy kind who treats rich people in their homes, but the kind who has a small office in a poor neighborhood and charges whatever people can afford. Sometimes that was money, sometimes it was bread or mending or other services. We never had much, but we got by." "Sounds like a good man." "He was the best man I ever knew," Sarah said softly. "He believed in helping people, in making the world a little better wherever he could. When he died, I felt like I had lost not just my father but my compass. I did not know which direction to go anymore." Caleb nodded slowly. "I felt something similar when my grandfather passed. He taught me most of what I know about horses and ranching. For months after, I kept turning to ask him something or show him something, and then remembering he was gone. That moment of remembering over and over, that was almost worse than the first grief." "Yes," Sarah breathed. "Yes, exactly that." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, two people who had both known loss and understood its weight. Then Caleb cleared his throat and gestured toward the mountains. "That is where I found you yesterday, down in that direction. You were a lot farther off the trail than I expected anyone to be. I almost did not go that way." "What made you?" Sarah asked, curiosity overcoming her. "One of our young steers wandered off. I was tracking him, following his prints. He had gone south for some reason, maybe spooked by something. I was about ready to give up and head home when I saw you and your horse." "Then I owe my life to a wandering steer," Sarah said with a shaky laugh. "I suppose you do. I found him on my way back, by the way. He was standing under a cottonwood near a wash, cool as you please, like he had not led me on a 5-mile chase." They returned to the house to find Martha up to her elbows in bread dough. She put Sarah to work immediately, showing her where everything was kept and explaining the routine of feeding the household. Sarah fell into the work gratefully, letting the familiar motions of cooking and cleaning anchor her. The days began to develop a rhythm. Sarah would rise early and help Martha prepare breakfast for the men. After the meal, she would tackle whatever household chores needed doing: laundry, mending, baking, cleaning. In the afternoons, when the heat became oppressive, she would retreat to the coolness of the adobe house and work on quieter tasks like sewing or reading from the small collection of books the Hayes family owned. Evenings were her favorite time. The family would gather after supper, and they would talk about the day, about plans for the ranch, about news from neighbors and nearby towns. Sarah learned that the Hayes family was well respected in the area, known for fair dealing and hard work. People would sometimes ride out to ask John's advice on ranching matters or to see if Caleb could help with a difficult horse. Caleb, she discovered, had a gift with horses that bordered on uncanny. She watched one afternoon as he worked with a young mare that had been mistreated by a previous owner and had become dangerous, striking out at anyone who approached. He spent hours with the animal, never rushing, never losing patience, just gradually earning her trust through quiet persistence and gentle handling. "How do you do that?" Sarah asked him after the mare finally allowed him to stroke her neck without shying away. "You have to think like them," Caleb explained. "Horses are prey animals. Their instinct is to run from danger. When they have been hurt by people, they see all people as danger. You have to show them over and over that you are not a threat, that you are patient and consistent and safe. Eventually, if you are lucky, they decide to trust you. It sounds exhausting. It can be. But it is worth it when you see them come around, when they stop being afraid. There is nothing quite like feeling a scared horse relax under your hands and knowing you helped them get there." Sarah thought about trust and patience and the slow work of healing, and wondered if the same principles might apply to people as much as to horses. She was healing, she realized. Not just physically, though her sunburned skin had faded and the cracks in her lips had healed. But something deeper was mending too, some part of her that had been wounded by loss and fear and uncertainty. The Hayes family's kindness was working on her much like Caleb's gentle persistence worked on his frightened horses. And there was something else growing too, something she tried not to examine too closely. She found herself watching for Caleb throughout the day, noticing when he came in for meals, listening for his voice when he spoke to the horses or the other ranch hands. At night, lying in bed, she would replay their conversations, analyzing every word and gesture for meaning that might not be there. It was foolish, she told herself. She was a guest here, dependent on these people's charity. She had no business developing feelings for their son. Besides, he had given her no indication that he saw her as anything other than a woman in need of help. His kindness was exactly that kindness. It would be a mistake to read more into it, but her heart did not seem to care about logic. It kept insisting on racing whenever Caleb smiled at her, on warming whenever their hands accidentally touched while working on some task, on hoping for some sign that he might feel even a fraction of what she was beginning to feel. 2 weeks passed. Then 3. Sarah's health fully returned and her mare recovered completely. Martha declared that Sarah had more than earned her keep with all her help around the house. The time had come to make decisions about the future. One evening after supper, John brought up the subject that everyone had been carefully avoiding. "Sarah, Ben Morrison is planning to drive some cattle north in about 10 days, he said. His route will take him within a day's ride of Santa Fe. He is willing to let you travel with his crew if you want. It would be a safe way to get where you are going." Sarah felt her stomach clench. She had known this moment was coming, but that did not make it any easier. "That is very kind of him. Please thank him for me." "We will outfit you properly this time," Martha added. "Good supplies, a reliable horse, everything you need, and we will make sure you have clear directions and know where the way stations are." "I do not know how I can ever repay all you have done," Sarah said, her voice thick with emotion. "Just promise to write and let us know you arrived safely and found your uncle," Martha replied. "That will be payment enough." Sarah nodded, not trusting herself to speak. She should be grateful. She was grateful. These people had saved her life and were now ensuring she could complete her journey safely. But the thought of leaving, of saying goodbye to the life she had briefly glimpsed here, filled her with an ache she had not anticipated. She risked a glance at Caleb and found him staring at his plate, his jaw tight. As if feeling her gaze, he looked up, and their eyes met across the table. Something passed between them in that moment, some wordless acknowledgement of what neither of them had spoken aloud. Then Caleb looked away and the moment was gone. That night, Sarah lay awake for a long time, staring at the ceiling and trying to sort through her tangled feelings. She barely knew these people. She had been here less than a month. It was ridiculous to feel so attached, so reluctant to leave. But Boston had never felt like home the way this ranch had begun to. And she had never felt about any man the way she was beginning to feel about Caleb Hayes. The next morning, Sarah threw herself into work with renewed vigor, as if she could somehow repay months of kindness through a few days of intense effort. She baked bread and pies, tackled the mending that had been piling up, organized the pantry, and helped Martha with the endless task of feeding the household. Caleb had been conspicuously absent since breakfast, off working somewhere on the far reaches of the ranch. Sarah told herself it was just as well. Distance would make leaving easier. But late in the afternoon, Martha sent her out to the barn to fetch some preserves from the root cellar. Sarah made her way across the yard, enjoying the relative coolness that came as the sun began its descent. She was almost to the barn when she heard voices from inside. Caleb and his father, their tones suggesting a serious conversation. Sarah knew she should make her presence known or leave, but something made her pause just outside the open barn door. "You are being stubborn," John was saying, frustration evident in his voice. "I am being practical," Caleb replied, and he sounded strained in a way Sarah had never heard. "She has an uncle waiting for her in Santa Fe. She has plans, a destination. I cannot ask her to give that up." "Have you even talked to her about it? Maybe her plans are not as fixed as you think." "Pa, she is here because she has nowhere else to go. The last thing she needs is me complicating things by telling her how I feel." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Caleb had feelings for her. The possibility sent her heart racing. "Son, I have seen the way you look at her, and I have seen the way she looks at you. You are both dancing around something that is plain as day to everyone else. Life is too short and too uncertain to let chances pass by because you are afraid." "I am not afraid," Caleb protested. "No, then what are you?" There was a long silence. Then Caleb said, so quietly Sarah almost missed it, "I do not want her to feel obligated. We saved her life. She might think she owes us something, that she has to return whatever feelings I might express. That would not be fair to her. So instead you are going to let her leave without ever knowing how you feel. That does not seem fair either. It is her choice to make. If she wants to go to Santa Fe, I will not stand in her way." "Caleb, I need to get back to work," Caleb cut him off. "Those colts are not going to train themselves." Sarah heard footsteps approaching and quickly backed away from the door, hurrying around the side of the barn. Her heart was pounding so hard she felt dizzy. Caleb had feelings for her. He was letting her go because he did not want her to feel obligated. The realization hit her like a physical blow. She had been so convinced that his kindness was just general goodness, that he saw her as a responsibility rather than as a woman. But he felt something too. He felt it and was choosing not to act on it because he thought it was the right thing to do. Stubborn, noble, infuriating man. Sarah pressed her hands to her face, trying to think clearly. What did she want? If Caleb had feelings for her, if there was even a possibility of something between them, did she still want to go to Santa Fe? Her uncle was a kind man, or had been when she last saw him years ago, but he was still essentially a stranger now. The ranch near Santa Fe was a hope, not a certainty. For all she knew, her letter had never arrived and he was not expecting her. Or he might have moved, or any number of other complications could arise. Here she had something real. A place she was beginning to care about, work that felt meaningful. People who had shown her kindness without expecting anything in return, and Caleb. Quiet, competent, good-hearted Caleb, who gentled horses with patience and rescued foolish women from deserts, and apparently had feelings he was too honorable to express. Sarah realized she had made her decision. She was not going to Santa Fe. Not yet, anyway. Not until she at least tried to see if what was growing between her and Caleb could become something real, but first she needed to talk to him. She found him in one of the smaller corrals, working with a leggy chestnut colt. The young horse was skittish, dancing away each time Caleb approached, but Caleb simply waited patiently, letting the animal come to him on its own terms. Sarah leaned on the corral fence and watched, waiting for the right moment to interrupt. After several minutes, the colt finally allowed Caleb to approach and stroke its neck. Caleb murmured something too low for Sarah to hear, then turned and saw her watching. Something flickered across his face, surprise, pleasure, and something that might have been longing, before he schooled his expression to polite neutrality. "Need something?" he called. "I need to talk to you," Sarah said. "When you have a moment." Caleb glanced at the colt, then nodded. He gave the young horse a final pat and climbed out of the corral, dusting off his hands on his pants as he approached Sarah. "What is on your mind?" he asked, and Sarah noticed he kept his distance, as if afraid to get too close. "I overheard you and your father talking earlier," she admitted. "In the barn, I did not mean to eavesdrop, but I heard enough to understand that there are things we need to discuss." Caleb's jaw tightened. "Sarah, you do not need to." "Please, let me speak," Sarah interrupted. "I need to say this before I lose my nerve." He nodded slowly, waiting. Sarah took a deep breath. "When you found me in the desert, I thought I was going to die. I had accepted it. And then you appeared like something out of a dream and you saved my life. These past weeks, your family has shown me more kindness than I had any right to expect. You have made me feel safe and welcome and valued. You earned your place here," Caleb said. "Maybe, but somewhere along the way this stopped being just about gratitude or earning my keep. I started to care about this place, about your family." She paused, gathering her courage. "About you." Caleb went very still. "Sarah, I know you think I might feel obligated because you saved me," she continued, speaking quickly now before she could falter. "But this is not obligation. I have spent the last 2 weeks trying to convince myself otherwise, trying to be sensible and remember that I barely know you, that I have plans to go to Santa Fe. But the truth is, the thought of leaving makes me feel like I am tearing something vital out of my chest." "You do not have to leave," Caleb said, and his voice had gone rough. "If you want to stay, you can stay. You do not have to go to Santa Fe if you do not want to." "I want to stay," Sarah said, "but I need to know if you want me to stay. Not because I am helpful around the house or because it is the charitable thing to do, but because you feel something for me the way I am beginning to feel something for you." The words hung in the air between them. Caleb stared at her, and Sarah saw the war playing out across his face, want and honor and fear all battling for dominance. Then, slowly, he stepped closer. He reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I have wanted you to stay since the first week you were here," he said quietly. "I kept telling myself it was impossible, that you had a life planned somewhere else. But every day I would wake up and my first thought would be wondering if you were still here or if you had decided to leave in the night. The thought of you riding away, of never seeing you again, it has been eating at me." "Then ask me to stay," Sarah whispered. Ask me properly. Caleb's eyes searched her face as if looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. Then he took her other hand, holding them both carefully. Sarah Brennan, would you consider staying here at the ranch, not as a guest or a worker, but as someone who belongs here? Someone who might consider making a life here with me, if that is something you could want. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears this time. Yes, I would like that very much. The smile that broke across Caleb's face was like sunrise, transforming his usually serious expression into something brilliant and joyful. He pulled her closer, and Sarah went willingly, letting him wrap his arms around her. She rested her head against his chest and listened to the strong, steady beat of his heart. I cannot believe you heard that conversation, Caleb murmured into her hair. I was trying so hard to be noble and let you go. I am very glad you were not entirely successful, Sarah replied, pulling back to look up at him. Though I appreciate that your heart was in the right place. My heart has been in your hands for weeks now, Caleb said, and the simple honesty of it made Sarah's breath catch. I just did not know how to tell you. You could have tried the direct approach, something like, Sarah, I care for you and would like to court you properly if you are amenable. That sounds much smarter than my plan of suffering in silence, Caleb admitted with a rueful smile. Much smarter, Sarah agreed. Then, emboldened by his confession and the way he was looking at her, she rose up on her toes and kissed him. It was a brief kiss, chaste by any measure, just a soft press of lips. But the feeling that rushed through Sarah at the contact was anything but chaste. It was electric, thrilling, like touching lightning and surviving it. When she pulled back, Caleb was staring at her with an expression that made her feel warm all over. I am going to court you properly, he said firmly. I am going to do this right. But I need you to know that I am already certain. I have been certain since the moment you asked about your horse before asking about yourself. I knew then that you were someone special. I am not special, Sarah protested. I am just a woman who made bad decisions and got lucky. You are brave and kind and resilient, Caleb countered. You crossed half a country alone to find a better life. You survived being lost in the desert. You adjusted to a completely different world without complaining. You are extraordinary, Sarah, even if you do not see it yourself. No one had ever spoken to her like that, with such conviction and admiration. Sarah felt something shift inside her, some wounded part of herself beginning to heal under the warmth of Caleb's regard. We should tell your parents, she said, though she was reluctant to break the spell of this moment. They already know, Caleb said with a laugh. Ma figured it out within days. Pa has been nagging me to say something for over a week. They are going to be insufferably pleased with themselves. He was right. When they returned to the house and announced that Sarah would be staying permanently and that Caleb would be courting her, Martha actually clapped her hands in delight. Finally, she said. I was beginning to think I would have to lock you two in a room together until you figured it out. You knew, Sarah asked, feeling her cheeks heat with embarrassment. Dear girl, everyone knew. The two of you have been making eyes at each other for weeks. The only people who did not seem to realize it were you and Caleb. John laughed at Sarah's expression. Do not worry about it. Young people are always the last to figure these things out. What matters is you sorted it eventually. That evening felt celebratory despite the lack of any formal festivities. The meal was the same as always, but the conversation flowed differently, easier somehow, with an undercurrent of happiness. Miguel and Tom had clearly been informed because they both congratulated Caleb with knowing grins and welcomed Sarah to the family with genuine warmth. After supper, Caleb asked if Sarah would walk with him, and she agreed readily. They strolled out toward the corrals, watching the last light fade from the western sky and the stars begin to emerge in the darkening east. I should write to my uncle, Sarah said, struck by a sudden pang of guilt. Let him know I am well, but that I will not be coming to Santa Fe after all. He might have been expecting me. We can send a letter with the next supply wagon that heads north, Caleb suggested, And if he writes back and still wants to meet you, we can make the trip together. Visit properly so he knows you are settled and happy." The casual way Caleb included himself in her future plans made Sarah's heart swell. This was real. This was happening. She was not going to wake up and find it had all been a dream. "Tell me about growing up here," she said, wanting to know everything about him. "What was it like?" Caleb leaned against the corral fence, looking out over the darkening land. "It was good. Hard sometimes, especially when we had drought years or lost cattle to illness. But good. My sister and I grew up running wild over these hills, learning every inch of the ranch. Pa taught us both to ride before we could properly walk, and Ma made sure we could read and do figures. You must miss your sister." "I do. We were close growing up. She married a good man, though, and she is happy on their ranch. We see each other a few times a year." "I know she is going to love you. How can you be sure?" "Because you are kind and real and not afraid of hard work. Those are the things she values most. Plus, she has been nagging me for years to find someone and settle down. She will be thrilled I finally listened." They talked until full dark, sharing stories of their childhoods, their hopes, their fears. Sarah told him about her father's work, about growing up in a city so different from this vast open landscape. Caleb told her about learning to break horses, about the year a wildfire nearly took the ranch, about the time he helped birth a foal when he was only 10 years old, and felt like he held life itself in his hands. The more Sarah learned about him, the more certain she became that she had made the right choice. Caleb was exactly what she had needed without knowing she needed it. Steady and strong but gentle, confident without arrogance, passionate about his work but never too busy to notice the people around him. Over the following weeks, Caleb courted Sarah with an old-fashioned formality that charmed her completely. He would ask permission to sit beside her after supper. He brought her wildflowers he found while riding fence lines. He taught her to ride properly, patiently correcting her form and showing her how to move with the horse rather than against it. In return, Sarah learned the rhythms of ranch life and found herself falling in love not just with Caleb, but with the entire life he offered. She loved the vastness of the land, the way the mountains turned purple at sunset, the sharp, clean smell of the air after a rare rainstorm. She loved the satisfaction of a good day's work, of bread rising perfectly, of horses responding to gentle training. Most of all, she loved the sense of belonging that had eluded her for so long. The Hayes family had absorbed her completely, treating her not as a guest, but as one of their own. Martha taught her to preserve fruit for the winter. John showed her how to keep the ranch accounts. Miguel taught her some Spanish, and Tom showed her how to throw a rope, and Caleb. Caleb was patient and attentive, never pushing but always present. He held her hand when they walked. He kissed her sometimes, sweet, careful kisses that left her wanting more. He talked to her about the future, about plans for the ranch, about the life they might build together. 3 months after Sarah had nearly died in the desert, Caleb asked her to marry him. He did it simply, without fanfare, on an evening when they were checking on a mare who was close to foaling. They were leaning against the stall door, watching the mare pace restlessly when Caleb suddenly turned to Sarah and said, "I want to marry you." Sarah blinked at him, momentarily speechless. That was not exactly a question. "I am nervous," Caleb admitted. "Sarah Brennan, will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life trying to make you as happy as you have made me these past months?" "Yes," Sarah said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely yes." Caleb pulled a simple gold band from his pocket. "It was my grandmother's. Ma gave it to me last week. She said she knew I would be asking soon and wanted me to have it." He slipped the ring onto Sarah's finger and it fit perfectly. Sarah stared at it, this simple symbol of promises and futures, and felt tears spill down her cheeks. "I love you," she said, the words coming easily because they were so utterly true. "I love you so much, Caleb Hayes." "I love you too," he replied, pulling her into his arms. "I have loved you since you looked at me with those fierce eyes and asked about your dying horse. I loved your courage and your compassion, and I have spent every day since falling more in love with who you are." They were married 6 weeks later in a small ceremony at the ranch. A circuit preacher happened to be passing through, and Martha seized the opportunity to arrange the wedding. Sarah wore a simple white dress that had belonged to Caleb's sister, altered to fit her by Martha's skilled hands. Caleb wore his Sunday best and looked so handsome Sarah's breath caught when she saw him waiting for her. The ceremony was held outdoors, with the vast sky overhead and the land stretching endlessly in all directions. Miguel and Tom stood as witnesses, along with Martha and John. Sarah's uncle had written back in response to her letter, sending his blessings and a promise to visit in the spring. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Caleb kissed Sarah with a tenderness that made her heart ache in the best possible way. The small gathering cheered, and Martha dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. They held a celebration afterward, with neighbors from nearby ranches joining them for food and music and dancing. Sarah met more people in one evening than she had in her entire time at the ranch, and all of them welcomed her warmly as Caleb's bride. Late in the evening, when the party was winding down and guests were beginning to leave, Caleb led Sarah away from the crowd. They walked out to their favorite spot by the corrals, where they had first confessed their feelings months ago. "Happy?" Caleb asked, pulling her close. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Sarah replied honestly. "When I was lost in that desert, dying of thirst, I never imagined I would end up here, that I would find not just safety but love, not just shelter but home." "That desert brought you to me," Caleb said. "I will always be grateful for that, even though I hate thinking about how close I came to never finding you. But you did find me. And you gave me water and shelter and eventually your heart. You saved me in every way a person can be saved." "We saved each other," Caleb corrected gently. "You gave my life meaning I did not know was missing. You made me want to be better, do better, build something worth leaving to the next generation." "Speaking of the next generation," Sarah said with a shy smile, "I have been wanting to tell you something." Caleb pulled back to look at her, his eyes searching her face. "What is it?" "I am fairly certain I am with child. It is early yet, but all the signs are there." Joy blazed across Caleb's face, transforming him. He let out a whoop of happiness and swept Sarah up, spinning her around until she laughed and begged him to stop. "A baby," he said in wonder, setting her down carefully. "We are going to have a baby. Are you happy?" "Happy does not begin to cover it," Caleb said fervently. "Sarah, you have given me everything. A partner, a love, and now a family of our own. I could not ask for more if I had 1,000 lifetimes." They stayed out under the stars for a long time that night, talking about the future and the child who would be the first fruit of their union. When they finally returned to the house, they found it quiet and peaceful. Martha and John had gone to bed, giving the newlyweds their privacy. Caleb led Sarah to their room, the room that had once been just his but was now theirs to share. He closed the door behind them and pulled her into his arms, kissing her with a passion that had been carefully banked during their courtship. Sarah responded with equal fervor, letting herself feel everything she had been holding back. This was her husband, her love. The father of the child growing inside her. She could finally express the depth of her feelings without restraint. That night, they truly became husband and wife in every sense, joining together with tenderness and passion and love. Sarah had never experienced such intimacy, such complete vulnerability combined with complete trust. Caleb was gentle and patient, attuned to her every reaction, making sure her first time was filled with pleasure rather than pain. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the darkness, Sarah's head on Caleb's chest, his hand stroking her hair. "I cannot believe this is my life now," Sarah murmured sleepily. 6 months ago I was terrified and alone, convinced I was going to die in the desert. Now I am married to the most wonderful man I have ever known, carrying his child, living in a place I love." "Life is strange that way," Caleb agreed. "The worst moments can lead to the best outcomes. I found you on what should have been the worst day of your life, and it turned into the beginning of everything good for both of us." My cowboy hero, Sarah teased gently, riding to the rescue with his water and his kindness. Your cowboy husband now, Caleb corrected. For the rest of our lives. For the rest of our lives, Sarah echoed, and fell asleep wrapped in the warmth of his embrace. The months that followed were full of joy and challenge in equal measure. Sarah's pregnancy progressed smoothly, though the summer heat made her uncomfortable, and the morning sickness lasted longer than Martha had experienced with her own pregnancies. But Caleb was attentive and supportive, taking on extra work to spare her when she was tired, and Martha was a wealth of knowledge and reassurance. In late winter, with snow dusting the distant mountains and a cold wind howling outside, Sarah went into labor. Martha and a midwife from a neighboring ranch attended her, while Caleb paced anxiously in the main room with his father, wearing a path in the floorboards. After 12 hours of labor that tested Sarah's strength and resolve, she delivered a healthy baby boy. When Martha brought the infant out to show Caleb, the new father's hands trembled as he took his son for the first time. He is perfect, Caleb breathed, staring at the tiny face with wonder. He is absolutely perfect. Just like his father, Sarah called weakly from the bedroom, exhausted but elated. They named him Thomas James Hayes after both his grandfathers. Young Tommy, as he quickly became known, was a quiet baby with his father's dark eyes and his mother's stubborn chin. Caleb took to fatherhood with the same patient dedication he brought to everything else, getting up for midnight feedings and changing nappies without complaint. Sarah recovered from the birth and gradually returned to her normal activities, though everything was different now with a baby to care for. She would not have changed it for anything. Watching Caleb with their son, seeing the gentle way he held the infant and the wonder in his eyes, filled her with a love so profound it sometimes brought tears to her eyes. Time passed in the way it does when life is full and satisfying. Tommy grew into a sturdy toddler, then a rambunctious little boy who followed his father everywhere and wanted to help with every ranch task. 2 years after Tommy, Sarah delivered a daughter they named Emma Rose. Emma had her mother's lighter coloring and a sunny disposition that charmed everyone who met her. The ranch prospered under John and Caleb's joint management. They expanded their horse breeding operation and developed a reputation for producing some of the finest working horses in the territory. Sarah kept the accounts and managed the household, proving to have a head for business that served them well. When Tommy was 5 and Emma 3, Sarah's Uncle Thomas finally made the journey from Santa Fe to visit. He was an older man, gray-haired and weathered, but kind-eyed and quick to smile. He stayed for a week, and Sarah was glad to reconnect with her only living blood relative. But she also realized, watching him with her family, that he truly was more of a stranger than kin now. Her real family was here in this house on this land. You found a good life, Thomas told her on the evening before he left. Better than anything I could have offered you. That boy you married, he is a good man. I can see how much he loves you and the children. I know, Sarah replied simply. I am very lucky, not luck, Thomas corrected. You made good choices when it mattered. You were brave enough to come west, smart enough to accept help when you needed it, and wise enough to recognize love when you found it. That is not luck, Sarah. That is character. His words stayed with her long after he returned to Santa Fe. She thought about the frightened young woman who had nearly died in the desert, who had been so lost and desperate. That woman had been brave out of necessity, but she had also been willing to hope, willing to take chances, willing to accept the kindness of strangers. Sometimes Sarah would ride out to the southern edge of the ranch property and look out over the desert that stretched beyond. It was still stark and beautiful and unforgiving, but it no longer frightened her. Instead, it reminded her of how far she had come, of the journey that had brought her to this life she treasured. Years continued to pass. Tommy grew tall and strong, inheriting his father's way with horses and his mother's quick mind. Emma proved to be fearless and clever, always getting into some scrape or another, but talking her way out of trouble with a smile. Sarah and Caleb added 2 more children to their family, another boy named William, and finally, a daughter they named Martha after Caleb's mother. John Hayes passed peacefully in his sleep when Tommy was 15, surrounded by family and content with the legacy he was leaving. Martha followed him 3 years later, and though her death was not unexpected, it left a hole in all their lives. Caleb took over full operation of the ranch with Tommy working beside him, learning everything needed to eventually take his own turn as patriarch. Sarah, now in her 40s, remained the steady heart of the household, managing their growing business interests and ensuring the family stayed close despite the demands of ranch life. They had their struggles, as all families do. There were drought years that tested their resources and their patience. There was the year Emma fell from a horse and broke her arm, giving them all a terrible fright. There was the conflict when Tommy wanted to marry young, and Caleb insisted he wait until he was older and more established. But through it all, Sarah and Caleb's love remained constant. They still took walks together in the evenings when work allowed. They still talked about everything, sharing their thoughts and concerns and dreams. They still looked at each other sometimes and marveled at the unlikely chain of events that had brought them together. Do you ever think about what your life would have been like if I had not found you that day? Caleb asked her once, on a quiet evening when the children were grown and starting families of their own. Sarah considered the question seriously. Sometimes, I think I would have died in that desert. Even if by some miracle I had survived and made it to my uncle's ranch, I would have lived a half-life, always wondering what I had missed. You gave me everything, Caleb. Not just survival, but a reason to live, a purpose, a family. You gave me myself. I could say the same, Caleb replied. Before you, I was just going through the motions, working the ranch because it was what I knew, what was expected, but I did not truly understand what I was working for until you came along. You gave meaning to everything. They were sitting on the porch of the house, the same house where Sarah had first been brought half dead from thirst all those years ago. It had been expanded over the years, with rooms added for their growing family and improvements made as they prospered. But the heart of it remained the same, the thick adobe walls that had sheltered so much life and love. Tell me the story again, Sarah said, though she knew it by heart. About the day you found me, Caleb smiled, understanding her need to hear it. I was tracking a wayward steer, annoyed that I had to spend my day chasing after one stubborn animal. I almost turned back a dozen times, but something kept me going, some instinct I did not understand. And then I came over a rise and saw you, standing beside your dying horse, waving your arms to get my attention. I thought I was hallucinating at first, Sarah said, that you were a mirage, something my desperate mind had conjured up. You asked about your horse before yourself, Caleb continued. That was when I knew you were special. Most people in that situation would be thinking only of their own survival, but your first concern was for an animal who could not speak for itself. She was innocent in all of it. She deserved kindness. So did you, Caleb said firmly. And I am grateful every day that I was the one who got to provide it, that I got to be the one who shared his water with a dying woman and her horse, and in return received more love and happiness than any man deserves. We both deserved it, Sarah corrected. We both deserved the happiness we found together. They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink and purple. Somewhere in the house, they could hear their grandchildren playing, Tommy's children who came to visit often. The sound of young laughter and running feet filled Sarah with contentment. Do you have any regrets? Caleb asked quietly. Sarah thought about it, really considered the question. She thought about the life she had left behind in Boston, the father she had lost, the different path her life might have taken. But then she thought about everything she had gained, this man beside her, their children and grandchildren, the ranch that had become so much more than just a place to live. None, she said firmly. Not a single one. Every choice I made, Every hardship I endured, it all led me here to you, to this life. How could I regret the path that brought me home? Caleb reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite the arthritis that was beginning to plague them both. I love you, Sarah Hayes. I have loved you since the moment I saw you standing in that desert, refusing to give up even when death seemed certain, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. And I love you, Sarah replied, squeezing his hand. My cowboy, my hero, my home. As the years advanced, Sarah and Caleb settled into the comfortable rhythms of older age. They handed over more and more of the ranch operations to Tommy, who proved to be as capable as his father and grandfather before him. They spent their days working on smaller projects, tending the garden and spoiling their grandchildren. Sarah began writing down the stories of their life together, wanting to preserve them for future generations. She wrote about the journey west, about nearly dying in the desert, about Caleb finding her and sharing his water. She wrote about falling in love, about building a life from nothing, about the challenges and triumphs they had faced together. Emma, who had grown into a woman as fierce and independent as her mother, read the stories and encouraged Sarah to keep writing. These are important, she said. Not just for our family, but for everyone. They show what people can build when they have courage and love and determination. Sarah completed her memoirs when she was 65, a leather-bound book filled with stories and memories. She gave copies to each of her children, wanting them to understand where they came from and what their parents had overcome to give them the life they had. Caleb read it cover to cover, tears streaming down his weathered face. You made it sound like an adventure, he said when he finished. It was an adventure, Sarah replied, the greatest adventure of my life, and it is not over yet. She was right. They had years yet ahead of them, years filled with the quiet joys of watching their family grow and prosper. They saw Tommy's children grow up and start having children of their own. They celebrated anniversaries and birthdays and holidays, surrounded always by the family they had created. On their 40th wedding anniversary, their children organized a grand celebration. The ranch was filled with family and friends, 3 generations gathered to honor the couple whose love had started it all. There was food and music and dancing, just like at their wedding so many years ago. When the party finally wound down and the guests began to leave, Caleb and Sarah stood together in the same spot where they had been married 4 decades earlier. The land looked different now, more buildings, more fences, more signs of human habitation. But the essential character of it remained unchanged, still vast and wild and beautiful. 40 years, Sarah marveled. Has it really been that long? Feels like both forever and no time at all, Caleb replied. Every day with you has been a gift, Sarah, even the hard ones. Especially the hard ones, Sarah corrected. Those were when we learned what we were truly capable of, when we proved that our love could weather anything. They stood together watching the sunset, as they had done countless times before and would do countless times again. The land stretched endlessly in all directions, their legacy written in the fences and buildings and most importantly in the family that would carry on after they were gone. Do you remember what I told you the day I found you? Caleb asked. I said you looked about half dead. Sarah laughed. Not the most romantic first words. No, but they were true. You were half dead. And then you came back to life here on this ranch in my arms. You bloomed like a desert flower after rain, becoming more than I ever imagined. That is what love does, I think. It brings us back to life. You brought me back to life, Sarah said softly. You and your water, your kindness, your patient heart. You gave me everything when I had nothing, and I hope I have given you even a fraction of what you gave me. You have given me everything, Caleb assured her. A home, a family, a purpose. You gave me yourself, Sarah, and that was the greatest gift I ever received. As darkness fell and the stars began to emerge, they finally went inside, hand in hand as they had been for 40 years. The house was quiet now, everyone else gone or asleep, and they moved through the familiar rooms with the ease of long practice. In their bedroom, Caleb helped Sarah with the buttons on her dress, as he had done countless times before. She helped him with his boots, a ritual so familiar it required no thought. They prepared for bed together, moving in comfortable synchronicity. When they finally lay down, Sarah curled into Caleb's side just as she had on their wedding night all those years ago. His arm came around her automatically, holding her close. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," he replied. "Always have, always will." They fell asleep that way, wrapped in each other's arms, content in the knowledge that they had built something lasting and good. The ranch would go on. Their children would carry forward the lessons they had learned and the values they had tried to instill. And the story of how a dying woman and her dying horse had been saved by a cowboy with a generous heart would be passed down through the generations, a testament to the power of compassion and love. Years continued to pass. Sarah and Caleb grew older, their movements slower, their bodies bearing the marks of a life fully lived. But their minds remained sharp and their love remained strong, a constant in a changing world. When Caleb was 75, he fell ill with a fever that the doctors said came from a lung infection. For a terrifying week, Sarah sat by his bedside, bathing his forehead and holding his hand, refusing to leave his side. Their children gathered, and Sarah saw in their frightened faces an echo of her own fear, but Caleb was stubborn and he pulled through. "Cannot leave you yet," he told Sarah when the fever finally broke. "We still have stories to write." "We have already written more stories than most people dream of," Sarah replied, tears of relief streaming down her face. "But I am very glad you are staying to write more." The illness left Caleb weaker, and he had to give up much of the physical work he had always loved. But he adapted, finding new ways to contribute. He worked with the young horses from a chair in the stable, using his voice and his presence to gentle them. He advised Tommy on breeding decisions and ranch management. He sat on the porch with his grandchildren and great-grandchildren, telling them stories of the old days. Sarah remained healthy and active well into her 70s, still managing the household and tending her garden. She would bring Caleb flowers from her garden every day, reminding him of the wildflowers he had brought her during their courtship. On a clear autumn day when Sarah was 78 and Caleb 80, they sat together on their porch watching the sunset. The sky was particularly beautiful that evening, streaked with colors that seemed almost unreal in their intensity. "It is a good life we have lived," Caleb said, his voice softer than it had once been but still warm. "No regrets, no wishing for things to be different. Just gratitude for every moment." "Yes," Sarah agreed. "Gratitude for the desert that nearly killed me but instead brought me to you. Gratitude for your generous heart and the water you shared. Gratitude for this family we built and this land we have cared for. Gratitude for every single day I have gotten to spend as your wife." Caleb squeezed her hand gently. "When I go, and I will go before you because men always do, I want you to know that my last thought will be of that day in the desert. Of seeing you for the first time, so brave and fierce even in the face of death. That is the moment my real life began, Sarah. Everything before was just preparation, and everything after has been grace." "Do not talk about going," Sarah protested, though she knew the conversation was necessary. They were old, and death was no longer an abstract concept but an approaching reality. "We have to talk about it," Caleb said gently. "I need you to know that I am not afraid. I have lived a full life with the woman I love, raised children I am proud of, built something lasting. When my time comes, I will go peacefully, knowing I made the most of every day I was given." Tears spilled down Sarah's face, but she nodded. "I understand. And I want you to know that if I go first, you must not grieve too long. You have to keep living, keep enjoying the family and the land." "Promise me?" "I promise," Caleb said. "Though I suspect I will not be long behind you, I do not think I know how to exist in a world without you anymore." "Then we will go together," Sarah said with a watery laugh. "When we are both very old and very tired, we will simply go to sleep one night and not wake up. That seems fair." "That seems perfect," Caleb agreed, but life rarely follows our scripts. 2 years later, on a cold winter morning, Caleb simply did not wake up. He died peacefully in his sleep, Sarah beside him, his hand still holding hers. The funeral was large, attended by family and friends from all over the territory. Caleb was laid to rest on a hillside overlooking the ranch, with a simple stone marking the place. Sarah stood at the graveside, supported by her children, and felt as though half of herself had been torn away. The weeks after were the hardest of her life, worse even than those desperate days in the desert. At least then she had hope, the possibility of rescue and survival. Now she had only the aching absence of the man who had been her partner for over 50 years. But she had promised Caleb she would keep living, and Sarah had never been one to break a promise. She drew strength from her family, from the land, from the memories of their life together. She still walked out to their favorite spot by the corrals each evening, imagining Caleb beside her, and found comfort in the familiar landscape they had loved together. Spring came, bringing new life to the ranch. Foals were born, calves dropped, and the desert bloomed with unexpected flowers after a wet winter. Sarah worked in her garden, coaxing vegetables and flowers from the stubborn earth, and found peace in the simple act of nurturing growth. One evening, as she sat on the porch watching another spectacular sunset, her great-grandson came to sit beside her. He was 8 years old, curious and bright, with Caleb's dark eyes. "Grandma Sarah, will you tell me the story?" he asked. "About how you and great-grandpa Caleb met." Sarah smiled, feeling the familiar warmth that came whenever she told this story. "Well, it begins with a dying horse and a foolish woman crossing the desert alone." She told him the whole story, from her desperate situation to Caleb's miraculous arrival, from those first tentative feelings to the life they had built together. The boy listened with rapt attention, his eyes wide with wonder. "So great-grandpa saved your life?" he asked when she finished. "He did," Sarah confirmed. "He shared his water with me and my horse, even though it meant having less for himself. That is the kind of man he was, generous and kind and brave, and that is the kind of man I hope you will grow up to be." "I will try," the boy promised solemnly. "I will try to be like great-grandpa Caleb." After he ran off to play, Sarah sat alone with her memories. She thought about Caleb, about the life they had shared, about all the moments both monumental and mundane that had woven together into the tapestry of their existence. She was 82 years old now, and she could feel her body weakening, time catching up with her. She did not fear it. Death would reunite her with Caleb, and that thought brought comfort rather than dread. 2 months later, on a warm spring evening, Sarah went to bed feeling unusually tired. She lay down in the bed she had shared with Caleb for so many years, closed her eyes, and felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. Her last thoughts were of a dying horse, a merciless desert sun, and the sound of approaching hoofbeats that had heralded her salvation. She thought of Caleb's face when he first saw her, of his hands offering water, of his voice saying she looked about half dead. She thought of falling in love, of building a family, of 50 years of happiness earned through courage and perseverance. She thought of how a single act of kindness, sharing water with a stranger, had changed everything, had created ripples that spread outward to touch so many lives. Her children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren, all of them existed because Caleb Hayes had chosen compassion over indifference, because he had stopped to help a woman and her horse who were dying in the desert. Sarah died that night, peacefully, with a smile on her face. They laid her to rest beside Caleb on the hillside, and the stone they erected bore both their names and a simple inscription. She was crossing the desert with a dying horse. He found her and shared his water. Together they built a life of love. The ranch went on, passed down through the generations. Tommy ran it until his own children were ready to take over. The land prospered, the family grew, and the story of Sarah and Caleb became family legend, told and retold around dinner tables and campfires. Years turned into decades, then into a century. The ranch modernized, adapted to changing times, but remained in the family. And on certain clear evenings, when the light hit just right, ranch hands would swear they could see two figures standing by the old corrals, hand in hand, looking out over the land they had loved. The desert remained, vast and beautiful and unforgiving. But it also remained a place of transformation, where a dying woman had found life, where a generous man had found love, where two souls had found each other against all odds. The story lived on, a testament to the power of compassion, the strength of love, and the way a single moment of kindness can echo through generations. Sarah and Caleb were gone, but what they had built remained, not just the physical ranch but the legacy of love and family that continued to grow and flourish. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived on the land, still raised horses and cattle, still told the story of their ancestors. The original adobe house had been preserved, turned into a kind of shrine to the couple who had started it all. Visitors could see Sarah's memoirs in a glass case, could look at faded photographs of the couple in their prime, could stand in the room where they had raised their children. And always, the story came back to that moment in the desert. A dying horse. A foolish but brave woman, a cowboy with a generous heart who stopped to share his water. It was a simple story, really. But the best stories often are tales of kindness and courage, of love found in unlikely places, of lives transformed by compassion. Sarah and Caleb's story was all of these things and more. It was a reminder that we never know when we might be called upon to be someone's salvation. That a small act of kindness can change everything. That love, when nurtured with patience and care, can grow into something that outlasts mortality. The desert sun still beat down mercilessly on travelers. Horses still struggled in the heat. People still got lost, still faced desperate situations. But sometimes, if they were lucky, a rider would appear on the horizon. Someone with water to share and kindness to spare. Someone who chose to help rather than pass by, and in that moment, everything would change. Just as it had for Sarah Brennan and Caleb Hayes on a blazing afternoon over a century ago, when one man's generosity had sparked a love story that would echo through generations. The land remembered. The family remembered. And the story lived on, a beacon of hope in a sometimes harsh world, proof that even in the bleakest moments, salvation can arrive on horseback with a canteen of water and an open heart. Sarah and Caleb's love had started with shared water in a desperate moment, had grown through patient courtship and honest communication, and had flourished into a partnership that lasted a lifetime. They had faced challenges together, celebrated triumphs together, and built something that transcended their individual lives. In the end, that was their true legacy, not just the ranch or the family, but the example they set. They showed what was possible when people chose love over fear, kindness over indifference, commitment over convenience. They proved that the most unlikely beginnings could lead to the most beautiful endings. And so their story concluded not with sadness but with fulfillment, not with loss but with lasting legacy. Sarah had crossed the desert with a dying horse. Caleb had found her and shared his water. Together, they had built a love that would never die, a family that would never forget, and a story that would be told as long as there were voices to tell it and hearts to hear it. It was a good story. It was a true story. And it was, in the end, a story of hope, that even in our darkest moments, help might be riding toward us across the sand, ready to share what they have and change our lives forever.